Dona eis requiem.
All right, so let's get started. The very first thing I'm going to start with here is the wet palette. And like I said, I have this really nice Masterson's one that I got for, I don't see 15 to 20 maybe. I looked online, it's a little more expensive now, unfortunately. Things like this, they just kind of go up and down. But you don't need to spend that money. You can do it for practically free, just pennies or $1 or $2. Basically, get yourself a Tupperware container that's shallow. I like it's kind of better if it's shallow, like this. This was from a container of ham. No biggie. Get a paper towel folded 4 times in the bottom of it, like so. And then put a piece of parchment paper over the top of it. Now, parchment paper is coming off of a roll, so it's going to have a tendency to roll one way or another, and you want to make sure it tries to roll down. If you do it where it's going to upside down the other way, where it's going to roll in, it's just going to curl up on itself constantly, and you'll be fighting it. But basically, get your sponge, your makeshift sponge, which is your paper towel, wet. You want to have a little bit of water left in here, but basically get it real wet, pour everything out, let it all drip out, and then just have it be pretty thoroughly damp. Then put your piece of parchment paper on top. Wax paper will not work. Parchment paper is what you need because it's porous. Wax paper with that one side that's waxed won't let the water through. And then sprinkle a little more water on top, from the sink, run it over the faucet over, and then pour out the excess again, And just like I said, leave yourself a little bit. It's handy to have. And if you have droplets on top or you have wrinkles like this, that's okay. It doesn't matter really. That is the nice thing though about the kind of more professional palettes. They're cut perfectly to fit, and you avoid the problems with the bubbling a little bit, but it doesn't really affect much. And when you're done painting and you want to keep your paint, or if you want to pause, whatever, just put the lid back on here, and this thing will stay moist for weeks. And you can just add a little water to it to get it going again. So I'm not going to use this one during the painting, but I just wanted to show how it was made. Very simple. And I have actually a link to a video below, which is what helped me find this in the first place. Taught me how to make this. So I'll link that in the description. But we're going to use I'm going to use my palette just because I'm comfortable with it, familiar. And here you can see that it's just covered in old paint, and I washed it off. I scrubbed it really good with hot water, so most of this shouldn't bleed through, but doing like a white, I don't want to pick up a red tint, so I'm going to avoid that. Let me flip this around. So I'll probably work in some of these empty areas up here, just kind of get the last of this palette paper that I can before I switch to a new one. And we're going to be mixing white and brown anyway, so this little area is perfect for me. If I bleed a little brown into it, I don't care, but I do want to stay away from the red, blue, black areas. I don't want to bleed those into our model. We don't want a light blue skeleton. That'd be a little odd. So I'll probably be working right here. This will be off screen a good bit of the time because I really only have room to focus on the model. But if I need to call it out, I'll bring it back in and show you as I mix paints and whatnot. Obviously, I have my cup of water over here that I'm going to use to keep my brush wet. Maybe add a little water back to the powder every once in a while. And then I have a paper towel that I use to dry and clean the brush between colors. These are really the only colors we're going to use right now until maybe the detail phase. We might use a little different colors then, but really white and black. Brown. I'm going to go with a light brown for this guy, and then silver. Silver for the scythe at the top, which they're a little off frame, but we're going to make the scythe silver. And you could obviously just do gray, but if it's a little metallic, it'll look a little bit better. I'm going to move this aside for a minute and talk about these. Like we said before, this is our primed model. It was 3D printed, so it's a little rougher than the injection molded official models that come from HeroQuest. Here's what we're aiming for right here, and it'll be hopefully close. It's not going to be quite as smooth, the model won't be, but hopefully the paint job will look pretty good. This right here though, this is the first, not just the first HeroQuest Skeleton mini I ever painted, this is the first miniature I ever painted, period, ever, any kind of mini. And I painted this back in high school in 1994 using, for like the detail in the rib areas, I literally just used a single hair that I yoinked out of my head and used black. At the time, I had no idea about base coating, about washes or shades. I had no idea about different layering. I had no idea about dry brushing at the end, or doing any kind of basing around the base. So it was pretty rough, and he wasn't primed, and so as you can see, it's chipping around the base here, and this little chip missing from there where he's been played with, in the game, and his paint job is chipped off. And I could redo him, certainly, but I like to leave him. He's nostalgic. Like I said, it's the first mini that I ever painted, and I think he's not great, for sure, obviously not when compared to something like this, or especially compared to one of the minis being airbrushed, which are phenomenal. You can see some great stuff out there, and I'm nowhere near that skill level, but he's totally fine if you wanted to play a game. I think it's still better than just a flat gray or white mini. I think it adds a little bit of character, and so if this is the skill level you're at, this is fine. But we're going to shoot for a little bit better today. So I'm going to move him way to the back. All right. And again, this is the goal, and here's where we're starting. So first up, we're going to get our paint on our palette. All right. Try to put this somewhat in frame. The great thing about acrylic paints, they're non-toxic, which is great. You don't have to worry about pets and kids and whatnot and getting into them. They're water-based, which means they can be thinned with water, which is fantastic, but also they're water-soluble, so they can be cleaned really easily with water. You don't have to worry about, oh no, I got it on my clothes, I got it on my hands, on my desk, whatever. You can clean it right off, no problem. Fast drying. That's my favorite thing about acrylic paints over, say, oils. You can achieve some beautiful things with oil paints, but for doing minis, this is where it's at, because even though it'll say here, let dry 1 hour between coats, literally you can blow on it with your mouth and watch it dry. I mean, it will dry in seconds. Now, sometimes that can be problematic, but generally that's fantastic. So you can switch colors really, really quickly. And you can, like I said, you can clean it up with water. So, and they're cheap. They're so cheap. This little bottle, what, 2 ounces? You could probably paint 100 skeletons with this, if not more. We're literally only going to squeeze out just a couple of drops. I'm going to shake this off camera, or I can shake it on camera. Now, for whatever reason, the white that I have is a lot thinner than most of the other colored acrylics. It's a little bit runny. I'm going to put it right in this area. You got to watch out. You get little dried cruddy bits sometimes on the nozzle, which you can, if you're careful, you can pick them off and just kind of chuck them. All right. Oop, yeah, this just runs right on out. I'm going to get a decent little pool, a couple of drips. That's probably enough. Always do more later. Now, the black will probably mainly be for the base later. The brown here is going to be, we'll put it over here adjacent to the white, because we're going to mix it in with it. And you'll see the brown is considerably thicker, and we need very little. The brown is going to be used for 2 purposes. It's going to be used to make our white kind of more of an off-white, because obviously our skeleton, is decayed and old. He's not going to be shiny bone white like this guy was. That's a little unrealistic. So we want him to be kind of a little more off-white. And then also the brown will be used for the staff of the scythe, the wood part. And I'm going with a light brown. It doesn't really matter. That's personal preference. I'm going light right now just because our shade that we use later, our Agrex Earth Shade, is another brown, and it will make it a little darker. You don't want to go too dark, because if you shade it too much, it'll end up looking almost black. I'm not going to be using this fine detail brush yet. That'll be for fine details later. I'm going to be using this one. I don't really even know what number. It's a 0, whereas the fine detail is a 10-0. And it's not coming to a super fine point right now. It's all of my brushes are super used, so this one's a little widened out. But we will bring our water in. And most of the time I'm going to keep the water off camera. But basically we're going to dip it in there. And then I like to rotate it around the edge. Dip and rotate. And I'll move this away. We kind of rotate as we drag. You'll see it's coming to a little bit more of a point. Mine has been used for a very, very long time, so you can see it slightly hooks, because I've probably brushed that way a long time, so it's kind of curved up. But we're going to grab just the teensiest dab of brown, and we're going to start mixing it in to the edge of this white. And we're going to just go in circles. You can see the white really changing color there. You gotta be careful because sometimes you'll have a big glob of brown underneath, and if you're not careful, if you don't mix thoroughly, you'll end up getting, you'll get a streak of that on your model, which isn't, again, doesn't matter if you mess up. That's a great part about acrylics. Doesn't matter if you mess up. You can literally wait a minute or two. It'll be dry, and you can go over it again. Now, I'm not a professional painter. I'll tell you that right now. It'll be very obvious from this video, I think, to anyone who is watching. And they'll talk about you do not want to get paint up in the ferrule. That's this part right here, past the hairs, because it's hard/impossible to clean it out. And if it's a dark paint, it could bleed down later when you're trying to do something light, and it can contaminate. You know what? These are cheap brushes. If it happens, it happens. You don't want it to happen, but it's not going to be the end of the world if it does. And we're not going for perfection here. Now, you don't want this much paint. That's a lot of paint. So I'll go to kind of an empty area, and I'll twirl it as I drag it and get down to a lot less paint. And then sometimes I want a little more, but just on the tip. All right. Let's bring our guy into shot here. Basically, we're just going to go all over the skeleton. We're going to try to avoid the staff, but if we bleed onto it, it doesn't matter because we'll be coming over it with a darker detailed color later. Obviously, stay away from the scythe if you can. We don't need to be touching that. When you get to the feet, if you're going over the base and you bleed this white onto the base, that doesn't matter either because you're going to be going over that with black later. So it'll cover it up. It's a lot easier to cover a light color with a dark one than vice versa. So we'll start with our light ones. And basically, we're just going to rub it on. Now, people will say you should water down your paints. Water down your paints, water down your paints, water down your paints. And we've done that a little bit with this wet palette here, and with getting water in the brush. Now, what you want to avoid is, see how thick that is there? It'll really fill in the crevices of the chest. You want to brush it out as much as you can to avoid that. If you get any thick parts in there, just dig in there a little bit with your brush and get them out. Doing many takes patience. I obviously it would be great if painting in general I found takes patience, because really if you want to do it right, you need to do multiple coats. And nobody wants to do that. That takes time. That's slow. That's boring. No, thank you. I want to hurry and do this fast. But if you do and you get giant globs everywhere, it's not going to look great. Now, I don't know how it's shown up on the video, but to me, this color almost is coming on looking like peach a little bit, which is not super great, but it's not the end of the world. What we can do here, because this is a base, is we can get them a little brighter. We'll pull in a little more white when we're done with this layer. We'll go over it again, and I'll just swirl in a little bit more white and make it a little bit lighter shade, which will be fine. Oh, sorry. If I bump the camera again, like I said, this is the first time I've ever tried to do this with the camera between me and the model, which is awkward to say the least. Yeah. That's a bit thick. Yeah. Especially for fine detail areas like the faces, you want to not put it on too thick. Now, with 3D printing, as soon as you start putting this on here, all the little layer lines are really going to pop out. If it's a 3D printed model, if it's an FDM printer like what I've done. If it is a resin printer, actually, you might have a beautiful, very nicely done model, because they can go down to just, a couple of micron detail level, whereas this printed at 0.1, this is 100 micron is the detail level, which is, I'm bad at my metric system, but I think that means it's a 100 thousandths of a millimeter. Sounds right. So 1/10 of a millimeter, basically. Yeah, 0.1 millimeter nozzle is 100 microns. We're not gonna dab down the eyes too much because they're gonna be dark anyways. All right, and anywhere you start with it, as soon as you grab a blob on your brush and you start, it'll be real thick at first. You want to make sure you spread that out relatively soonish, because, like I said, this stuff will dry quick. The front's already dry here. And it will trend to blob down inside little gaps, like the ridges down between the ribs. That happens. Really, the worst is if you get a glob in eye sockets or mouths or noses and it dries, that detail can be gone. You can lose it very quickly. And trying to clean that out is a bit of a pain. Not impossible, but not the most fun thing either. I've tried to clean this model up as good as I can, as far as with an X-Acto, to get all the little stringing and zits and stuff off of it. But inevitably, after painting it, there's some of them it'll come out very clearly once you prime it and you get a little darker. And then there's some defects that you'll see much clearer once it's covered in a lighter color. And inevitably, I'll probably see something. And as long as it's not too glaring, I won't really mess with it. But if I see something just poking out horribly, I may get the X-Acto knife and clean it up again. Now, again, going back to watering down your paints, I've seen so many times people say you cannot water down your paints too much. Well, obviously that's not true. I mean, you can water them to the point where instead of doing 2 or 3 layers, you'll be doing 20 layers. But if you water them down enough, you just have a wash or a shade. I think Citadel Paints calls them shades. And generally they're called washes, and you're going to see what a wash does in a little bit, and it's great. I love washes. And that's fine. It's going to take a ton of layers. So Citadel sells kits, and they sell different types of paints. They sell what are called base paints. So it'll be your first base layer, which is kind of what we're doing now. And they sell layer paints, which you'll put on top of your bases, obviously. And then they sell shades, which are washes. They sell contours and contrast paints. And I mean, it gets real fancy, and you can drop a lot of money on paint. I think there were links in the last video I had to a couple of colors of Citadel on Amazon that I like to get, just because certain colors are hard to mix. Purples and oranges are hard to mix yourself. Surely, obviously you can, but it's not easy. And then things like browns and greens, they're easy to make browns and greens with the primary colors. It's just hard to make the exact same shade every time. And if you want to be consistent across a bunch of models, or a large model where you're going to have to mix paint several times maybe, it's better to just start with a bottle of brown or green. And they're so cheap. These apple barrel paints from Walmart are just like 50 cents a pop. You can buy even bigger bottles for $2 or $3 that are like 10 times the size of these, and they're going to last you forever. That's more for painting on canvas, though. This is for, you'll never use all that paint. I have a large size bottle, probably like 20 ounces or something, of black, white, and I want to say the primary colors from back when I was in high school, and I haven't even used half of those bottles, and they're 20-something years old. And they still work just fine. That paint has not gone bad. I know people said acrylics can go bad, they can separate, and they can have problems, and if they get exposed for too long to air and moisture, they can, I don't know about mold, but like they maybe it's mildew. I don't know. They smell terrible, people have said, but none of my paints have done that. Now, the bottom of this guy, which you might see here, is really rough. It's kind of ugly. This is where overhangs on my 3D printer have problems. They end up kind of really rough, but we're not going to see that. We really care about the front of this guy, so that's less of an issue. Not too worried about it. Let's paint in this guy's pelvis. Elvis the pelvis. Yeah. So I apologize. As you can tell probably already, I'm going to ramble on and on and on while I'm doing this. I guess I could play some music or something. Or I could tell you guys a funny story. I don't know. I don't have a lot of really funny HeroQuest stories. I've been playing the game for forever. since I got it back in high school. I think it's a fun little board game. It was Milton Bradley's attempt at like D&D light, and I don't know if it didn't go over well or what, but they just stopped producing it and they've never done it again. It's certainly a cult classic game. It's a huge favorite among RPG and tabletop gamers, to the point where if you have a full set that's in even semi-good condition, I mean, it's worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars on eBay. I have my original core set. I don't have the expansions. If you have all 4 of the expansions, and I think 2 of them only came out in Europe, if you have the core and all 4 expansions, you can usually pull upwards of $1,000 or more for that, even in just very heavily used condition, because they've been out of print for so long. The upside is I've discovered, like I said, all these models are out there on the internet. So if you want to 3D print them yourself, you can then print all the rule sheets and all the paper bits. You can just print on paper, and you can just have your own little set to play. All right, now we're getting down on the base, and I'll inevitably smear some on the base, which is okay. It's easier to be rough now and careful later. What we'll do when we paint the base with black is I'll do big broad strokes all around the feet without touching them, and then when I need to get close, I'll get the detail brush and be very careful and try not to get black on the feet. And even if I do, I don't care. It's okay. We'll fix it. We'll totally fix it. Now, what I haven't ever really got into, and I'd love to, maybe, it's kind of scary to me, is airbrushing. When you see the super detailed minis that you sometimes see out on the web, generally speaking, those are airbrushed, and it's amazing the level of detail. We're talking like, not only can you see the eye, you can see the pupil and the iris and everything in the eye. And I feel like these guys must paint these under a microscope or have just the most amazing eyesight ever. Speaking of eyesight, I just realized I'm not wearing my glasses, which explains why this isn't as clear to me as I wish. But I'm not doing details yet. I'm just slathering on the base paint. We're going to get down between them toesies and try to get the paint off the brush a little bit and try to sweep it clean and make sure we don't have a glob that loses the definition of the toes. I think we're good. You can see I'm bleeding all over this scythe, but that's okay. It's fine. Now, that said, you can do all this with a dry palette, but I found things just so much easier once I went to a wet palette. Oh my goodness, it's just glorious. Right under in here, since we're doing the same model probably, at least my friends are, which is the ones who asked me to make this video, you'll notice that, especially even on the injection molded model, you'll notice this. The staff and the leg kind of really blend together. It's really hard to tell where one ends and one begins. So when we get to defining the staff, we're just going to have to make our own line. We're just going to have to decide where it ends to some degree, especially on the 3D printed model. On the injection molded one, it's a little clearer, but still it kind of blurs together down there. And that's fine. Same with the leg over here. It kind of blurs. Yeah, I think we're pretty close to up. See, you always miss some spot. There's always something. I probably should have gone for water again. My brush is getting a little bit dry. Okay, I don't see any major glaring spots that are missing paint. Now he looks a lot more skeletal now. He's kind of white. Yeah, now that he's dried, it's actually not looking too bad. It's not looking as peachy. I think when the paint was wetter, it's a little more peach looking than when it dries, which is fine. There's a little spot we missed. Trying to get in that angle there, up underneath the skull. And again, you'll see this when we get to it, but the Agrex Earthshade, the wash we're going to use, is going to really hide a lot of the flaws in this model, which will be great, although it may highlight some as well. But all right, that is first layer. Let's see. So I can get just to focus on him. Sorry, the camera is real picky. I'm going to move a couple of things out of frame. Maybe over here. He looks pretty good. He's definitely very rough. You can see that from the 3D printer. But that's when you're looking at this, like, you know, not under a microscope, but we're up real close with a high definition lens. I mean, you put him out there on the table. Hey, look, it's a skeleton, you know. And remembering this guy's only like, I don't know, maybe 40 millimeters high, 45-ish. The base is around 25. That's a standard size for most D&D minis. So that's our base layer. It looks pretty good. I'm going to pause the video here. All right, round two. I don't need to clean my brush out because we're going to be probably doing the same color on him, but just for the sake of practice, we're going to dip our brush in the water, and then we're going to rub it against the side here. And this is hard to see because we're doing white on white. With other colors, this will really pop out. We're just going to push it, twirl it a little bit. One thing I used to do when I tried to clean my brush was I would jam it down the bottom and then just smush it flat and then spin it, and all the bristles would splay out, and you really get the paint out from underneath and between the bristles. True, but you really deform the head of the brush, unfortunately. Don't do that. I've learned that's a quick way to ruin brushes. And again, these are cheap. That's true. This brush is worth like less than $1, but why waste it? All right, so there we go. Is that and again, with this being white on white, it's gonna be very hard to see this. But I will lay the brush in here, pinch down on it, and pull away. Rotate like a half turn to a quarter turn. Do the same thing again. Again, going from light to dark, less of an issue, but going from dark to light, if you have dark colors left up in the brush here, like you can see there's still some white paint in here, it's going to bleed down into your thing and really cause problems. So I'll do this a couple of times. Now, like I said, you can see it easier when it's a darker color, which we'll see with the brown later. And you basically will keep doing this until when you come into the paper towel here and you pull it away when there's no more streaks left. And you're probably going to be all right at that point. And again, I've got a little bit of white up in the base, but we're going right back to white, so that's okay. I'm going to get some water. Just a little bit. And then I'm going to do some more mixing. Just a little bit. I'm going to get a little more white into this right here. And it's still going to be an off-white, but maybe a little bit lighter shade. And the reason I'm going lighter right now is because our wash is going to make the end result of the model quite a bit darker. I could just do straight pure white, I guess, but I don't want to. All right, got most of that out of the brush. Now we'll just dip a bit, bring our guy back into focus here. I hope he's been mostly in focus while I'm painting. It's really hard for me to tell. I'm kind of painting through the phone. So you can see areas where it's kind of gray, the gray of the primer is coming through. So we're going to do one more coat. And again, I'm going to be a little speedy here. Just because I'm impatient. Areas like this up underneath this cavity, you're not going to see them very much, so don't worry too much. Obviously, generally speaking, I'm going to pay more attention to the parts of the model that have the detail that are going to be seen the most, which is the front, the top, and to a lesser degree the back. But underneath and stuff like that, you're not gonna see those areas as much, so not so worried about it. Now, I am not sure if the slit for his mouth is just not formed well, or if I've got some paint up in it. So we're gonna brush it as much as we can, try to clear out any paint. There's actually an open slit here, probably we're talking 1/3 of a millimeter or less on the real model, but it may have just kind of melted together on mine, unfortunately. Well, there's not much I can do about that. The printer I've been using for this, the Creality Ender 3 Pro, you can get an Ender 3 for about $179. I was shocked. So it made me finally decide to get into 3D printing. I had no idea. See, we missed this guy's pinky. Whoops. I had no idea it was that reasonable. Unbelievable. And a spool of PLA plastic filament for the printer is like $20 on Amazon. And will print you, I mean, a spool would print you hundreds of minis. If you're printing larger stuff, obviously it's going to run out quicker. And I did print quite a bit of large stuff as well. I've been printing, mask clips and face shields and things because of the current situation. Yeah, you can get all kinds of colors of PLA. You can get glow in the dark, metallics, color changing. I mean, cool stuff. And it's all fairly cheap. So yeah, that's cheap, but it's an FDM printer basically. So fused deposition modeling, I think is what that stands for, or something like that. But basically it's melting it, squeezing it out, almost like a hot glue gun squeezes out a rod of hot glue, and then layering it. It's got little motors to move it on an XYZ axis and layer it very small through a teeny tiny nozzle. I use a 0.4 millimeter nozzle on this guy. And then you tell it how high the layers are, and you can use smaller nozzles for finer detail, bigger nozzles for rougher, faster printing. But at 0.2 millimeter layer height, which is what this guy's printed at. Actually, no, this guy's 0.1, sorry, 0.1 millimeter layer height on a 0.4 nozzle, you can get this result. But for a couple $100 more, you can buy what's called a resin or SLA printer. And they print from a resin bath, and they cure the resin as it rises up out of the bath with either ultraviolet lights or lasers. And the results are just stunning. They look like professional grade stuff. If you order a piece from HeroForge or Shapeways or stuff like that, that is what they're printed with, resin printers. And you can get them in the $300, $400 range now. The downside is the resin is toxic, the fumes are toxic, you've got to be more careful. And I haven't got into this yet, but right now I'm printing with PLA. You can print on a FDM printer like mine with ABS plastic. And the advantage of doing that, it's a stronger plastic for sure. It is toxic and there are some fume issues to worry about. It's much higher temperatures to print, which is a concern. But you can, when you're done with the print, you can do a thing called acetone vapor smoothing. And you can basically build a cheapo little chamber where you will expose it to vapors from acetone, and it will smooth all of the roughness and the layer lines out of the model. And if you leave it too long, it'll straight up just kind of melt it. And you'll lose details. But you can end up making pieces that look quite a bit smoother. I don't know about for something as small as a mini like this, but for larger bits, you can do some very cool stuff I've seen. So I'll experiment with that later. But I'm going to get up underneath the chin, under his chinny chin. I think this is pretty good. I'm not going to go super duper layers of paint on this guy. I don't need to. And I think that's good. I think we're going to switch to brown paint. So setting him aside, I'm going to move the palette aside. We're going to get our cup again, and we're going to try to get as much of the paint out right now as we can with just washing it. It's really obvious when you've got a darker color. You can see as it thins, you get less and less out, and then it's time to start dabbing it on the paper towel. All right, go to the paper towel, squeeze, squeeze. I see little damp spots, you know, when you do that. Squeeze. All right, I think we're clean enough because we're going to a dark, so it's going to cover up a lot. Now, our brown. I'm going to get some water on the brush, spin it to kind of get a little bit of a tip. The more you use these brushes, the tip will just fray. It's made out of, even though these are nylon, or whether it's nylon hairs or actual hairs of something, it will fray and deform. The brush cleaner soap that I showed in the first video before this, you can not only use it to clean your brushes, but you can actually use it to kind of reform them. It's a little bit waxy, and if you form them with it and then leave them for a while, they'll tend to hold that shape a little longer, so you can kind of get a little bit of a point back to your brushes, which is nice. All right, we are going to go for the brown for the scythe handle. Words were not working there. I'm going to get kind of a good, 5-6 millimeters on there, and then spin it off so it's not just super globby. And then I'd like to just get a little on the tip. Okay, now we're doing a little bit more detailed stuff up here. We can just go kind of wild. We're not near anything. And this is thin enough that I'll probably definitely want to do 2 coats so we don't have this kind of dark gray shining through it. We may bleed onto the top of the scythe just a teensy bit. We'll clean that up when we get to detailing. So this does require, when you get to the detailing at least, definitely, this requires a fairly steady hand, which mine used to be much steadier when I was younger, and then I've had some issues that have caused nerve damage, and I'm also kind of working on rheumatoid arthritis, so that makes it a little tricky, a little wobbly. I am going to get my glasses. I am trying to look at something that is teeny tiny, and I'm trying to look at it a little further away than I want to because of the camera. So now I like to steady my hand on this hand on the desk, but also this hand on the desk, and do very small motions. So I'm going to move over to this side a little bit, probably push this back. Sometimes even prop the 2 hands against each other like that, so I have steadiness in my hands. There are some days when I just know that I can't do this. If I try, I'm just going to be paint everywhere. And there are some days when it's easy. And of course, you can really lose time doing this. When I do paint minis like this, I will typically, you can't really watch something, at least I certainly can't multitask that well. So I can't watch a show, but I'll listen to a podcast, something that I don't have to physically look at, or music. But a lot of times, because I'm generally doing RPG role-playing type minis, I'll listen to a podcast, something like Critical Role or Acquisitions Incorporated, C-Team, one of those things. Because you don't really have to look up and see what's going on there. I really hope this whole thing doesn't come out blurry. As far as the film footage, I don't know what I can do. I discovered that my 720p webcam was just not adequate for this, and none of my digital cameras would function as a webcam. So I'm actually using my phone, just a Motorola G7. See here, this scythe literally just fades into the pelvis. Like there is no dividing line. So I have to make the dividing line. Sorry, I bumped the camera there. So since I have to make it, I want to try to make it the same thickness that the scythe shaft handle already is. And it's not going to be perfect. I think that's his thumb I just painted over there. It sticks up right there. And that's okay because we'll call it back out later in detail with white paint. A bit heavy. My favorite part is doing the wash at the end and seeing the detail, the crazy difference that the wash makes. And I hope it works well on this 3D printed model and doesn't kind of make it look awful. We'll find out. I hope not. Oh, see, I bled over onto his finger right there. I don't know if you can see that. Wow, it really doesn't want to focus. Yeah, right there. Bled over on his finger. It's okay. We're going to fix it. It's fine. If I was Bob Ross, I'd say, you know, we're just going to make some happy little skeletons. Happy little skeletons. They just want to eat your brains. Oh no, that's zombies. I don't know what skeletons want. They just want to free your inner skeleton to join the skeleton army. I'm off frame. Thought about doing this live on Twitch so people could, you know, be like, "Hey, you got a frame? Hey, you're blurry or whatever." I'm not much of a streamer though. All right. Yeah, like I was saying, I don't have very many, certainly, really funny HeroQuest stories. But I do have one that comes to mind, and it's quite funny. I was running a campaign of, shall we say, HeroQuest Advanced, basically kind of bringing a little more D&D elements into it for some coworkers. And I set out a huge map that I had built that they would run through before getting to the dungeon on our conference table, probably 10 feet long. They started a tavern, very typical D&D RPG-esque. And I don't remember the exact specifics of this, but long story short, there was only 3 players, and in HeroQuest there's 4 heroes that the players play. And so no one was playing the dwarf, I guess, or I was going to play him or something, or he was just going to tag with the group, and one person would play 2 characters. I don't remember the specifics. But for whatever reason, the group decided that while they fed the dwarf like, not poison, but like spoiled sausages or something. I don't know, something awful. And he's a dwarf, so he ate them, of course. And then he got horribly sick, and he's in the outhouse. While he was in the outhouse, they locked the door and tipped the outhouse over on him, door side down, stole all his stuff, and ran off with it. Which is just, I'm like, I don't know, guys. There's not alignments in HeroQuest, but if there was, I think you would be bordering on chaotic evil right now. But then they ran with all his gear, and so I let them have it. And so at some point in the future, I think there's going to be a really angry dwarf looking for these guys. Very smelly, angry dwarf. I don't know if I'll make him a villain outright, but they may have some competition or something. All right, again, I have to kind of define where the staff ends there. It's not very clear. Same on this side. And this is hard to do, this level of detail with this wide of a brush. Really, I should wait for the detail brush. For instance, right here, there's a crevice inset here that actually needs to be painted brown, but there's no way with this brush to hit it without getting brown all over the hand and knee. So I'll wait for the detail brush to do that part. We're almost done with this first layer. And another thing I found, that the color that a paint is when it's wet is not necessarily indicative of what it will be when it dries. I don't know how well you can see this, but you can see that I can see that the wet brown paint here is much lighter shade than the dried brown paint. It will dry darker. However, you noticed earlier the off-white paint for the skeleton dried much lighter. And so I don't know what the rule of thumb there is, or if there is one, but you will notice that your paints will dry a different color than they are when they're wet. So that's just something to be mindful of. And it won't be necessarily like super far off, but it is a thing that happens. I don't think I need to do like a whole second layer on this. I just need to find a couple of spots where it's got gray or white shining through and just do touch up. Okay, starting to look real skeleton-y. Skeletal? Okay, this is a hard spot to hit right here on this model. It's a hard spot to see and hit. Under this hand, there's a bit of gray that I haven't hit yet. And I have to do it from the back side here. And it's just an awkward angle to paint at. And I'm not too worried because it's going to be, it's not a part you're going to see. You won't see it when you look at it from this angle, especially from above a little bit. You won't see it when you look at it from this angle either. So, it's not the end of the world, but I don't want to leave it blank if I can avoid it. When a character has a long cape or cloak and I have to paint up underneath it, I only go so far. I mean, you're not going to be able to get paint up in there, and no one's going to see it to care anyways, so what's the point? All right, I'm going to stop that there. Now, there's a little bit of white from the pelvis kind of bleeding on right here like a point. Let's see if I can get that out. Oh, that's too much paint. That's thick. And there's a little point here too. Part of it is just the model itself is that way. And then here on the arm, it looks like there's a little bit sticking down. It's a little better. Oh, and underneath the elbow. There we go. Okay. Let's change paint colors to the scythe. Let me see if I can get him up close and personal. Stay. To look at him a little better. Yeah, there we go. All right, he looks pretty good. Boy, the camera keeps wanting to focus on the paint bottles. I'm going to move them. And maybe it'll stay focused. Whoop, don't drop your paint. Maybe it'll stay focused a little better on this guy as I rotate him. Looking good so far. Oh, see, there's a little spot of gray we missed on the back of the scythe handle. I'm going to need to get that. Let's now look up underneath. It's hard to see. We got enough of that brown. I think we're okay. Yeah, let's see if we can dab that little spot real quick. And then call it good for the brown for now. All right. Well, obviously, like I said, you're not going to do super fine details with this. However, the more careful you are with it, the less fine detail cleanup work you'll have to do. So, you know, if you don't blach all over the white there when you come through with this, then you won't have to clean that up as much, which is nice. I do feel like I need to, sorry, do this a little bit. There we go. It's a little bit better. Okay. I'm going to move on to the silver for the scythe. So you can use gray, but silver will look a little better, you know. Let's move him to the back for a minute. Get our water. Now here you're going to see, as we do this, it's going to bleed out brown. And you want to dip and push and twirl a little bit until you're not bleeding out much brown. See, now it's getting very light. So now, time for the smoosh test. So actually got it pretty clean. The brown came out really, really well. So you can see just a little bit of brown there. And that's maybe one more time. That's pretty clean. It's clean enough. All right. Now, we're going to use one of the areas that already had silver, like maybe here, and I'm going to put some silver in. All right, we're going to switch to the silver paint. I want to apologize for the focus problems I was having earlier. I think it's trying to focus in and out on whatever's, you know, like now it's this, now it's this. It's got autofocus going. Now, you know, sometimes it wants to get the words in the back. So I try to remove as many things as possible from the frame so that it's not trying to constantly focus on them. So anyways, we're going to go to silver. Now I do want to call out these little tubes of all the basic colors and tertiaries and primaries and secondaries and all those colors. They're like 50 cents a pop for the 2-ounce tubes. Dirt cheap, and there's a million tones of color you can get at Walmart, which is great. However, this Apple Barrel brand, I've never seen any metallics in it. So we switch over to this folk art paint, which is in the same exact area, but costs a bit more. These are $1 or $2 per tube, I think, maybe even 3 or so. And there's different metallic colors. We're going to go with silver here because like it's cheaper. And we're going to use this for the scythe. However, silver's great if you want the metal to be shiny and clean and new, like, you know, knight in shining armor, kind of like silver armor, a silver sword. However, if you want an old, you know, worn steel look, it's a little too shiny. So you can mix a little black into it. Or this is where I like to use that lead belcher paint that I talked about in the first video. It's like a dark steel color, and you don't have to do anything to it. It just comes out looking that way. But we'll do a base layer of this shiny and then maybe add a little black to it. Or the wash we use may make it look a little darker. So I'm going to try to keep things out of frame. Just one little drop of this will do. It's real thick. Bloop. Like, so you can see it's so thick it stands up. So if you watch this, let's again off frame and get some water. Let's get our guy, and hopefully we'll have better focus on him now. This is just bloop. It's a mess, you know? So get a little on the tip. And despite being so thick here, I found that it often goes on kind of thin and it requires multiple coats. Yeah, see, we're brushing it on and you almost can't tell it's there. So I'll sometimes grab even more and get kind of heavy-handed with this stuff. And if you're, it really does help if you're going over a gray with it. Because it really just kind of adds a metallic sheen to the gray, which is what we want. We could just have our scythe be gray, but we want it to be shiny silver, or at least metal, you know? Now let's get the top. Can't forget the top. Unfortunately, you can definitely see the layer lines on this top here from printing, and there's really nothing I can do about that. That's some problem you won't have if you have a nice resin printed piece or an injection molded piece. Okay. Oh, I got off frame a little, sorry. But there we go. While that dries, and the metallics, I've found, pardon me, the metallics take a little longer to dry. Not sure why. They have maybe some oil in them or something. I'm not sure why. We're going to grab a splash of black. Just a teensy bit. And the black's going to go down here where we had black before. Actually, the black needs to be shaken. I've never had to shake the metallic. It's so thick. It hasn't separated. There we go. That one's black's pretty thick as well. I'm going to dip and grab some water. Even though we're not really changing colors, we're going to combine colors, so I don't need to clean the brush out. And I'm going to grab just it's a little frame, isn't it? Yep, just the teensiest bit of black. Just the tip of the brush. And then we're going to go over here to the metallic silver, and we're going to start mixing it in. And you should see we're getting a much darker silver. I'll leave part of that silver alone. Yeah. There we go. I may actually do a bit more black. That might have been too much. I may have to pull in quite a lot of my silver. It's okay. So this will make, here you go, black, just a dab of black in your silver, and you just got to play with it. Anytime you're mixing colors, you just got to try and see what you get. If you like it, you don't like it, go a little lighter, a little darker, a little more of whatever shade of color. This is still nice and metallic and shiny, as you can see on the raised parts, but it is much darker. So this is more like a steel now, or an iron. Even a little darker than this for iron, I guess. So now we're going to go back over it with this. Sorry, I'm kind of checking. If I pause for a minute, it's because I'm kind of checking my screen as I go to make sure that we're still in focus. It doesn't look a lot darker right now. Remember, though, things will dry different colors than they actually are when they're wet. And as I said, this takes a little longer to dry. So once I get it all on here, I think I'm going to take a break because I haven't had lunch and I'm hungry. If I get too hungry, my hands will be a little shaky and that won't be any good. So actually, I'm going to do one more little bit. Since we already have a dab of black on the board, I'm going to wash out the silver. And it's basically going to kind of come out as like a dirty, that's the black in there mainly. We're going to switch to pure black and paint the first layer on the base. So I'm just getting out any of the metallic silver bit, which it was pretty easy to get out. All right, get the brush wet. And we're going to dip into our black. And black, a little black goes a long way. So I always dab it out. All right. I don't know how well we can see this. I'm going to move these things a bit. I like to do, if you're going to just have a plain base, then just do black. But we're going to do some basing later, which is pretty neat. We'll put like some rubble and kind of like dirt, sand, grit, rocks on the base, which adds a little bit of character to it. But even when I do basing, I like to paint the underlying base black. So I always paint the base black before doing the basing. I'll kind of go all the way around while trying to stay just a teensy bit away from the feet. I'll kind of flatten out the brush along the base and then just sweep with it. And doing this as you approach a foot or whatever attaches your model to the base. If you do it like this, you can kind of go forward slowly, and you can kind of judge when you're getting close so that you don't paint up onto the foot of your model. And we'll deal with that in a minute. We'll get closer. Blacks for the base often take 2 coats. So like I said in the video earlier, you can't paint, you can't water your paints down too much. Obviously that's not true, but generally I think what they mean to say by that is it's unlikely you will water your paints down too much. But a better thing to say is that you can't paint too thin of a layer, and that is true. If the layer is too thin, you can come over it again with another layer. It's kind of like measure twice, cut once for carpentry. You cannot paint too thin of a layer because you can always go over it again, but you can absolutely paint too thick of a layer, and that's harder to undo. All right, we're getting almost done. All right, at this point, I've gotten really close to the feet in most places. And let me get around the rim of the base. Now here, it's really easy to get paint on the medicine bottle, but that's not the end of the world. Yep, there goes some. Again, we don't care. That's just fine. I don't generally bother painting under the base unless it has something written on it, which sometimes they do. I'll maybe sometimes paint it black and highlight the letters with gold paint, which is kind of neat. But If it's flat, I just ignore it. Just paint down real good on the edges. Almost done. You can see, I don't know if you can see in this video, where the black is drying right here and where it's still wet. And if I get close up to this, if I can do it without hitting the camera and blow, you might be able to watch it dry. Yeah, it's not quick enough, but literally, if I set this here on a time lapse for about 2 or 3 minutes, you would see the paint just dry as it goes. The thinner, obviously, the thinner the layer of paint is, the faster it's going to dry. But you see here, if I paint a stripe here, the difference between wet and dry. And this acrylics, when they're thin, when they're applied thinly, they dry so fast, which is usually great. Ooh, got a huge glob of black that time. All right, now I think we've got most of the base pretty well done. What I want to do now is get my glasses on and get right up close to the footsies. I'm going to get right up close to the feet with this brush and see if I can take out that line of white on the base. And again, I'm kind of laying the brush down on the base and applying kind of a downward pressure and then slowly moving it across and also forward until the lighter paint colors on the base disappear. All right, let's see if I can get in here and do this. But if you push up against the foot too hard, the brush will bend and apply black paint onto the side of the foot. Well, and that's what I get for trying to watch through the camera. I have a hard time with depth of field. So sometimes when I'm painting it here, I'm painting it through the camera to make sure I'm still in focus and in frame. But sometimes when I'm painting it here, I'm looking around the camera, like right now. So this is tricky. I'll definitely want to work on this setup and see if I can figure out something a little more comfortable if I'm going to do this any kind of a long term or more frequently. We're doing good. We're doing real good. Almost there. Let's see. Let's see if we can look at that. Oh, a little bit around that front toe there. And again, if the borderlines aren't absolutely perfect, it's okay. It doesn't matter because the shade and the basing will really hide a lot of the imperfections. I bled up onto the toe a little bit there, but that's okay. Yeah, I just realized one thing I need to fix. Well, I'll do that in the detail stage. So in the detail stage, I need to fix his thumb that I painted over with white. I need to clean up here. You can see I've bled some brown onto the pinky. Just make sure these lines are clean. I need to get into that little nook there. We might add some color to the eyes, an evil green or red glow, but we may actually do that after washing. Everything else looks pretty clean so far. My joint at the scythe, it looks clean enough. I don't need to clean it too much. Maybe the elbow right there looks like it has a dab of brown on it. So a little bit of cleanup, but I'm going to pause here and have lunch before we move on to that phase. So just looking him over, see if I can. I'm going to move this out of frame to see if I can get it to focus a little better. Looks pretty good. All right, I think it was pretty good. When we come back, we're going to do detailing and then a wash and then dry brushing.